Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today's video we're going to be talking about mobility aids, what's available, how they differ in some cases, but most importantly we're going to talk about why it can be so difficult to accept that we have to use them. First of all, I want to talk about some of the obstacles that we face with mobility aids. The first one being stigma. Society portrays people who use mobility aids as old, vulnerable, frail, somebody to be pitied, a non-sexual being, when in fact none of that is necessarily true. My view is different to that. Mobility aids are there for all ages and in fact don't need to be pitied just because you're using a mobility aid. In fact, I don't need the pity now, I'm using it because I can do all the things that I can't do without it, so it makes no sense. And as for being non-sexual, I don't agree with that, thank you. And I may well do an entire video based around the desexualisation of disabled bodies. Let me know in the comments if that sounds like something you would be interested in me recording. Mobility aids aren't used by lazy people. You don't have to worry about, am I disabled enough to use this mobility aid? A mobility aid is just a tool, just like glasses help you see if your eyes aren't working quite as well as they used to. Just like a washing machine is a tool to wash your clothes. You can actually wash your clothes by hand, but it's easier, it's less tiring, and sometimes better to wash them in a washing machine. Mobility aids are just tools that we use to help us live a more rich and fuller life. Another obstacle is ableism. We experience ableism from an external source when somebody asks you nosy questions because they believe that because you are using a mobility aid that gives them the right to ask about your personal details about your health. Because if you're not using a mobility aid, you would never walk up to a stranger in the street and just ask them about their last doctor's visit or why they might be walking that way. It's only because you're using a mobility aid, people believe that gives them the right to ask you that question when it doesn't at all. So nosy questions is one. Are you faking is another question that people they might not even ask it directly, but they might say it behind your back. It's another form of ableism. You shouldn't have to prove how disabled you are. No one else is living your life. No one else has your experiences. So that is not anyone else's place to judge. And it's certainly not something to be pitied because you're using a mobility aid. So again, that's a form of ableism. But not all ableism comes from the external sources. There's a lot of internal ableism as well. Before I was in a wheelchair, I didn't even realise that ableism was a thing. I certainly wouldn't have thought I was ableist in any way. I wouldn't have thought I was anyist in any way. And to find out that I have this internal ableist voice that tells me things, that tells me lies, is very, very... It's difficult for me because I don't want to be that way, but it's so drilled down deeply that I have to challenge those voices, but at least I hear them and I do challenge them. My view when people ask me nosy questions about why I'm in a wheelchair very much depends on the mood that I'm in, the setting that I'm in, who that person is, why they might be asking that question. So sometimes I might decide that I'm not going to answer that question at all. However, because of the condition I have, which is FND, functional neurological disorder, there's not very much known about that condition. So I will often try and take that opportunity to educate people about FND. So if the situation's right, if my mood's right and I'm not feeling too snarky, then I might actually answer the question. But you don't have to answer people's questions about your health. That's a personal, intimate detail that you don't have to share. In fact, nobody has the right to decide what your reality is. What you live with on a daily basis cannot be experienced by anybody else. Therefore, they have no right to tell you how disabled you are or judge how disabled you are and how much you might need that mobility aid. They have no right to do that. And I very much view myself as something not to be pitied. I'm absolutely fine using my mobility aids I am free to do what I want when I want to do it. If I didn't have my wheelchair, then that might be something to be pitied, because I'd be desperately sad. I wouldn't be able to do the things that I can, especially knowing that if I had a wheelchair, I would be able to do them. However, because I have it and I can do what I want when I want, then I don't believe there's anything to be pitied there. In fact, my life is one of joy and celebration. Some of the toughest things that I struggle with my internal ableism is not being disabled enough. I challenge myself because it's very easy to think, oh, I'm not disabled enough to use this. I'm not paralysed. I don't have a spinal cord injury that's resulted in paralysis. So am I really disabled enough? Am I faking this? You know, these are things that I do hear myself say to myself, and I have to challenge that. It's a really tough one, and I'm working on it. But the fluid nature of FND, the condition that I have, does make that really, really difficult, because some things are possible some days and they're not another day. That makes that internal voice stronger, and that's harder for me to challenge. I am working on it, but what I fall back on is, if that tool, if that mobility aid makes doing that task easier, then just use it, Sandy. It's okay. Just be kind to yourself, be gentle to yourself. So that's kind of what I do to try and dull those voices down. Other internal ableist opinions are that I'm less attractive and embarrassed by my condition. Some of the elements of FND are not invisible. I have facial dystonia, which is when my muscles in my face pull to one side, and it's like a facial palsy, and it's very visible, and I do find that really challenging, especially if I'm in public. I have to try and remember and remind myself that my worth is not determined by my ability or my attractiveness, if you want to call it that, and focus on living my life authentically, with joy, and what I can do, and celebrate those things and focus on those things, and that's what I kind of have to do. I have to also tell myself that others' opinions of me don't matter. So my grandma had a great saying when I used to get upset about somebody had said something to me and it upset me. She used to say, consider the source. So basically what that means is the person saying that thing somebody that loves you, respects you and understands your condition? If it's not, then just don't worry about it. Their opinion doesn't matter. So when all else fails, that's what I come back to, my grandma. Okay, so let's move on to the different types of mobility aid. So walking sticks, there's many different types. I have quite a few different ones, different coloured ones, and they have different grips for your hands. Some of them you can get that are ergonomically designed for your left or right hand. I have some of those, and others are kind of ones that have an ergonomic grip, but they can be used in either hand. And the ones I choose to have are collapsible, because then I can pop them in a bag and they don't have to be out all the time, and they're easier to store. There are crutches that you can use as well, obviously. I haven't ever used crutches. I think if I was to buy crutches, I'd buy them from a company called Cool Crutches. No, there's no affiliation there, it's just a company that I know of, and I like the look of the crutches. They're all different colours, they're different patterns, and you can customise them, and they don't make that rattling noise when you walk with them. So that's one of the things I liked about them. Again, I'll put a link to their website in the description box down below. Then we come on to rollators, which are like walkers, but they have wheels at the bottom of them. So I have a couple of those as well. My favourite is the Nitro Rollator, and I'll put a link to that in the description box down below. It's quite heavy, but it's very sturdy and it's very smooth to push, and it has a little sort of bag at the front so you can take things along with you as you go. And so I have got that one as well. And then you have wheelchairs. There are two types of wheelchair. There is a manual wheelchair and there is an electric wheelchair. So I have manual wheelchairs, and I have one that is more ordinary one bought from a mobility store, and then I have a rigid frame wheelchair, which is much more nimble, much more light, and enables me to get around a lot better. I'll put a link again in the description box down below to the exact wheelchair that I've got. I actually filmed an entire video about my wheelchair and why I use it, so I'll link that up in the cards so that you can take a look at that one if you want to. So the best thing about a manual wheelchair is very light and portable. An electric wheelchair, whilst some of them can be quite light, they're not going to be as light as a manual wheelchair. So there are positives and negatives around electric to manual. I don't want to use an electric wheelchair because I really enjoy the flexibility of wheeling myself where I want to go. And so I don't feel that that's a solution for my situation at this moment in time. Then you have a scooter. So a scooter is really handy if you've got the space to store one, and it goes outside, it can go on the road. I believe there are some that can go on the road, and it's great for long distances. I've hired them before. At Kew Gardens, they hire them there, and you can just potter around doing what you want to do without having to worry about getting tired with your manual wheelchair. So there's definitely a place for them. It's just not something that I have at the moment. Okay, to summarise then, if it helps, use it. No one else should determine whether or not you need a mobility aid. Only you are living with your disability. Only you are living with your illness. Only you know how difficult things are. So you should be the judge of whether you need a mobility aid, and if it helps, then use it. Ultimately, embrace them. They're tools there to help you live a fuller, more pain-free, more enjoyable life. That's all they are. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video and found it useful, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more from me on living positively with a disability and chronic illness.